Vareth Kolshin stood at the observation deck of the Eternal Vigil and watched the stars pass by. He was a warrior of the Therian Dominion, born and raised for battle. His scales were thick and gray, marked with scars from dozens of campaigns. His people had never lost a major war. They were the finest soldiers in the known galaxy, and every species knew it. But now, even the mighty Therians needed help. The Vraxan swarm had appeared from the dark edges of space 3 cycles ago. They were a hive-mind species with no desire for peace or trade. They only wanted to consume. 3 star systems had already fallen to their endless hunger. Billions of lives had been lost. The Vraxan moved like a plague across the stars, and no single species could stand against them alone. So the alliance had formed. 12 species had joined together to fight this common enemy. Ships from across the galaxy now traveled side by side, carrying warriors of all kinds toward the front lines, and among them were the humans. Vareth had heard of humans before. They were a young species from a small blue world called Earth. They had only been part of the galactic community for about 50 cycles. They were not particularly strong or fast. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. Their bodies were soft and fragile compared to most species. Many in the galaxy wondered how they had survived long enough to reach the stars at all. When Vareth learned that humans would be joining the coalition forces, he felt nothing but doubt. What could such weak creatures offer in a war against the Vraxan? The answer came when the human ship docked with the Eternal Vigil. Vareth went to the hangar bay with his closest friend, Terran Sol. They wanted to see these humans for themselves. A crowd of Therian soldiers had gathered, all curious about their new allies. The airlock opened and the humans walked out. There were only 12 of them. They wore gray armor that covered their bodies, but looked thin and light. Their faces were exposed, showing pale or brown skin and strange flat features. They carried weapons that seemed small compared to Therian rifles. They moved in a tight formation, their steps quiet and controlled. At the front of the group walked a female human. She had short dark hair and eyes that seemed to look at everything at once. Her face showed no emotion as she approached Fleet Commander Doroth Yen, who waited to greet them. "Commander Lara Vance," she said, her voice calm and steady. "United Earth Marine Corps, my team is ready to serve." Doroth looked down at her. He was twice her height and 5 times her weight. His armored hide could stop most projectile weapons. Next to him, the human female looked like a child. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Vigil," Doroth said. His tone was polite but distant. "Your people will be assigned to support positions. Supply lines, medical assistance, communications. The front lines will be handled by more capable forces." Vareth expected the human to argue. He expected anger or wounded pride. Instead, Commander Vance simply nodded. "Understood, Fleet Commander. Where do you need us?" Doroth seemed surprised by her easy acceptance. He assigned the humans to a rear position and dismissed them. The human Marines followed Commander Vance out of the hangar without a single complaint. Terran laughed as they left. "Did you see them? They are so small, so soft. I could break one of them with my bare hands." Vareth nodded, but something bothered him. He had seen warriors from many species react to being called weak. Most became angry. Some tried to prove themselves immediately. But these humans had shown nothing. Their faces had remained calm, their eyes steady. It was as if the insult had not touched them at all, or as if they simply did not care what anyone thought. Over the next few days, Vareth watched the humans when he could. They kept to themselves mostly, staying in their assigned quarters and training in the lower decks. He saw them running through the corridors in the early hours, their feet pounding against the metal floors in perfect rhythm. He saw them practicing hand-to-hand combat, moving with speed and precision that surprised him. One evening, he passed by their training area and stopped to watch. The young human called Danny Cho was sparring with the large one called Kyle Barton. Danny was small, even for a human. Barton was tall and thick with muscle. It should have been no contest, but Danny moved like water. He dodged every strike, slipped past every grab, and landed quick blows that made Barton grunt with pain. When the match ended, both humans were breathing hard, but smiling. Vareth did not understand. They had just been hitting each other, and now they were laughing? He walked away with more questions than answers. 3 days later, the fleet received a distress call. Vareth was on the command deck when the message came through. The colony world of Sether Prime was under attack. The Vraxen had arrived faster than anyone expected. Thousands of colonists were trapped in the capital city. The swarm was closing in. Fleet Commander Doroth ordered all ships to change course immediately. They would arrive at Sether Prime in 6 hours. Every soldier aboard the Eternal Vigil began preparing for battle. Vareth checked his weapons, inspected his armor, and said the warrior's prayer of his people. He had fought in many battles before. He had killed enemies of all kinds. But he had never faced the Vraxen. He had only heard stories of their endless numbers, their complete lack of fear, their hunger that could never be satisfied. For the first time in many cycles, Vareth felt the cold touch of worry in his chest as he made his way to the deployment bay. He passed the human quarters. The door was open, and he could see inside. The 12 Marines were checking their gear with quick, practiced movements. Their faces were calm. Their hands were steady. Commander Vance looked up and met his eyes. She gave him a small nod. Nothing more. Vareth nodded back and kept walking. He told himself that the humans would break when they saw real combat. They would run when the Vraxen came. They were soft creatures from a soft world, playing at being soldiers. He was wrong. He was so very wrong. But he would not learn that truth until the blood started flowing on Sether Prime. The drop pods fell through the burning sky of Sether Prime like metal rain. Vareth gripped the handles inside his pod and felt the violent shaking as it cut through the atmosphere. Around him, his squad of 8 Therian warriors waited in silence. They were veterans, all of them. They had seen death before, but nothing could prepare them for what waited below. The pod slammed into the ground with a bone-rattling crash. The doors blew open, and Vareth charged out into Hell. The capital city of Sether Prime was on fire. Buildings had collapsed into piles of broken stone. The streets were filled with smoke and screaming. And everywhere, there were Vraxen. Vareth had seen images of them before, but images could not capture the horror of seeing them in person. They were insectoid creatures, standing on 4 legs with 2 more limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Their bodies were covered in black armor that seemed to drink in the light. Their heads had no eyes, only rows of teeth that clicked and ground together constantly. They moved in swarms, pouring through the streets like a dark flood, and they feared nothing. Vareth raised his rifle and fired into the nearest group. The plasma bolts burned through 2 of them, but 5 more took their place. His squad formed up around him and opened fire. The sound of weapons filled the air. Vraxen fell by the dozens, but hundreds more kept coming. "Fall back to the secondary position," Vareth shouted. His squad moved in tight formation, firing as they retreated down a narrow street. The Vraxen followed, climbing over their own dead to reach the Therians. Vareth had never seen anything like it. Most enemies broke when they took heavy losses. Most enemies had some sense of self-preservation. The Vraxen had none. They were a hive mind, a single hungry intelligence spread across millions of bodies. Each drung was disposable. Each death meant nothing to the whole dot. It was like fighting the ocean. You could kill a wave, but another would always follow. They reached a collapsed building and took cover behind the rubble. Varath's warriors were breathing hard. 2 of them were already wounded. The Vraxen had surrounded them on 3 sides, moving closer with each passing second dot. Then Terran screamed. Vareth turned and saw his friend on the ground. A Vraxen drone had gotten behind them somehow. Its claws were buried in Terran's shoulder, and dark blood was pouring from the wound. Vareth shot the creature off his friend, but the damage was done. Terran could not walk. He could barely stay conscious. "We need to move," one of his warriors shouted. "More coming." Vareth looked at the swarm closing in. He looked at his wounded friend. There was no way out. They would be overrun in minutes. Then he heard the sound of gunfire from somewhere to his right. Human gunfire. It sounded different from Therian weapons, sharper and faster. A moment later, the humans arrived. They came around the corner in a tight group, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for creatures without enhanced muscles. Commander Laura Vance was at the front, her rifle firing in short, controlled bursts. Behind her came Sergeant Kyle Barton, carrying a weapon almost as big as he was. The others followed in perfect formation. They did not hesitate. They did not slow down. They ran straight toward the Vraxen swarm. Vareth watched in shock as Kyle Barton stepped forward and opened fire with his heavy weapon. The sound was deafening. Vraxen drones exploded into pieces as the rounds tore through them. Barton walked forward into the swarm, his body taking hits that should have killed him, and kept firing. A Vraxen claw raked across his arm, cutting deep. Blood sprayed from the wound. Barton did not even look at it. He just kept shooting. "Get your wounded out of here," Commander Vance shouted at Vareth. "We'll hold them." Vareth wanted to argue. He wanted to say that 12 humans could not hold back a swarm that had almost overwhelmed 8 Therians. But the words died in his throat as he watched what the humans were doing. Corporal Megan Torres had already reached Terran. She was half his size, but she grabbed him by his armor and started dragging him towards safety with one hand. Her other hand held her pistol, and she fired at any Vraxen that came close. Her face showed no fear. Only focused. Private Danny Cho threw himself at a Vraxen drone that had gotten too close to the wounded. He was the smallest of the humans, barely more than a child in Vareth's eyes. But he fought the creature with his bare hands, jamming his knife into its head and again until it stopped moving. Then he stood up, covered in alien blood, and looked for the next enemy. The humans were not running. They were not breaking. They were holding the line against the nightmare, and they were winning. "Move!" Vance shouted again. "We can't hold forever." Vareth finally found his voice. He ordered his squad to retreat, carrying their wounded with them. The humans covered their escape, fighting a controlled withdrawal that gave them time to reach the evacuation point. By the time Vareth looked back, the humans were gone. They had melted into the smoke and chaos, still fighting, still holding. Later that night, Vareth sat in the medical bay aboard the Eternal Vigil. Terran was alive. The human medic, Taurus, had stopped the bleeding and stabilized him before they even reached the ship. Without her help, Terran would have died. Vareth stared at his hands. They were still shaking. He had been a soldier for 30 cycles. He had fought enemies that most species could not even imagine. He had always believed that the Therians were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. But today, he had watched 12 humans do something impossible. They had faced a horror that made veteran Therians falter, and they had not flinched. They had not hesitated. They had fought like demons, taking wounds that should have killed them and refusing to fall. What were these creatures? Vareth did not know, but for the first time in his life, he was afraid to find out. The forward operating base had been set up in what remained of a shopping district. Buildings surrounded them on all sides, their windows dark and empty. The Therian engineers had built walls from rubble and scrap metal. It was not much, but it gave them a place to rest and regroup before the next assault. Vareth walked through the camp in the early morning hours. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Vraxen swarm. He saw Terran falling. He saw the humans charging into that nightmare without hesitation. He found himself walking toward the human section of the camp. They had set up their area near the eastern wall. It was smaller than the Therian sections, just a few tents and supply crates. A single light was burning inside the largest tent. Vareth stopped outside and listened. He could hear voices low and calm. Someone laughed softly. It seemed impossible that anyone could laugh after what they had just survived. He pushed aside the tent flap and stepped inside. The humans looked up at him. Commander Vance was sitting on a crate, cleaning her rifle with slow, careful movements. Sergeant Barton sat nearby, his arm wrapped in bandages that were already spotted with red. The others were scattered around the tent, some sleeping, some checking their gear. "Therian warrior," Vance said. Her voice was neither welcoming nor hostile. It was simply neutral. "Something you need?" Vareth hesitated. He had come here to thank them for saving his squad. But now, standing in front of them, he realized he wanted more than that. He wanted to understand. "You saved my friend," he said finally. "And my soldiers. I came to give my thanks." Vance nodded. "We did what anyone would do." "No," Vareth said. "No, you did not. I have fought beside warriors from many species. I have never seen anyone do what you did today." The humans exchanged glances. Vareth noticed that their expressions did not change. They did not seem proud or pleased by his words. They simply accepted them. "May I sit?" Vareth asked. Vance gestured to an empty crate. Vareth lowered himself onto it, feeling awkward and too large in this small space. "I have a question," he said. "When we were surrounded, when the Vraxen were everywhere, how did you stay so calm? I am a veteran of many wars, but today I felt fear. Real fear. You showed nothing." Vance set down her rifle and looked at him. Her eyes were dark and tired. "We were afraid," she said. "Every single one of us. But fear is just a feeling. It cannot control us unless we let it. But how?" Vareth pressed. "How do you stop it from controlling you?" It was the young one, Danny Cho, who answered. He was sitting in the corner, his face still dirty with blood and dust. He could not have been more than 20 cycles old by human counting. "Because we have always been afraid," Danny said. "Our whole history is about being afraid and fighting anyway." He pulled out a small device and pressed some buttons. An image appeared in the air between them, a holographic display showing a blue and green planet, Earth. "This is our world," Danny said. "Beautiful, right? But also dangerous. Everything on Earth wants to kill you. We have predators that can tear you apart in seconds. We have weather that can destroy entire cities. We have earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, plagues. Our planet has tried to kill us 1,000 different ways." He changed the image to show strange creatures. Vareth saw animals with massive teeth, creatures with claws as long as his arm, insects that swarmed in clouds. "We did not evolve on a peaceful world," Danny continued. "We survived because we refused to give up. When something tried to kill us, we learned how to kill it first. When the weather destroyed our homes, we built them again. When disease spread through our people, we found cures. We never stopped fighting." Sergeant Barton spoke up, his voice low and rough. "Show him the other thing." Danny changed the image again. Now it showed humans fighting humans. Armies clashing on open fields. Cities burning. Explosions tearing through the sky. "We also fight each other," Danny said quietly. "We have been at war with ourselves since before we had written language. We learned to be soldiers before we learned almost anything else. Every generation has known battle. Every family has lost someone to violence. Vareth stared at the images. He had known that humans fought wars, but he had not understood the scale. These were not small conflicts. These were massive, brutal campaigns that had killed millions of their own kind. Why? He asked. Why would you do this to yourselves? Commander Vance answered. Because we are broken in some way that we do not fully understand. We have the capacity for great love and great cruelty. We can build beautiful things and destroy them just as easily. It is our nature. She stood up and walked to stand in front of Vareth. Even standing at her full height, she barely reached his chest. But something in her eyes made him feel like she was looking down at him. That is why we do not break in battle, she said. Because we have been fighting since before we could walk. It is in our blood. In our bones, in every part of what we are. The Vraxen are terrifying, but they are not the worst thing we have ever faced. We have faced ourselves, and we are still here. Martin lifted his bandaged arm. You asked how we keep fighting when we take wounds. On Earth, we have a saying. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. Our bodies are designed to heal, to adapt, to keep going even when we should fall. It is evolution. The weak ones died long ago. Only the stubborn ones survived. Vareth sat in silence for a long moment. He was beginning to understand something, and it filled him with a strange new feeling. Not fear exactly. Something deeper. These humans were not weak at all. They were survivors of a brutal world, forged in violence, tempered by endless war. They looked soft because their armor was on the inside. Their strength was not in their bodies, but in their refusal to surrender. I would like to fight beside you, Vareth said at last. In the next battle, if you will have me. Commander Vance studied him for a moment. Then she nodded. Welcome to the team, Therian. Try to keep up. Vareth returned to his quarters that night with a new understanding. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. Everyone had looked at their soft skin and small bodies and seen weakness. They had not looked deep enough, and now, standing beside them, Vareth was beginning to feel something he had never felt before. Something that would only grow stronger in the battles to come. Dread. Pure, cold dread. Not of the Vraxen. Of the humans themselves. The defensive wall stretched across the entrance to the capital city. It was the last line of defense. Behind it were 200,000 civilians who had not been evacuated in time. If the wall fell, they would all die. Vareth stood on the wall beside the humans, watching the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. It would have been beautiful if not for what was coming. The Vraxen swarm appeared as a dark line in the distance. Then the line grew wider and wider. Soon, the entire horizon was filled with moving black shapes. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. More than Vareth had ever seen in one place. Here they come, Commander Vance said. Her voice was calm, as if she was discussing the weather. Vareth checked his weapon for the 10th time. His hands were steady, but his hearts were beating fast. Around him, Therian and alien soldiers of all species took their positions. The coalition had gathered every warrior they had for this defense. It still did not seem like enough. The Vraxen did not stop to form lines or prepare for battle. They simply charged. The swarm poured across the open ground like a black tide, screaming with a sound that made Vareth's bones ache. Open fire. Fleet Commander Dorath's voice boomed across the communications channel. The wall erupted with light and sound. Plasma. Bolts, missiles, and bullets tore into the approaching swarm. Hundreds of Vraxen fell in the first seconds. Then hundreds more. The ground became covered with their bodies. But still, they came. Vareth fired until his rifle overheated. He grabbed a replacement from a fallen soldier and kept firing. Beside him, Kyle Barton worked his heavy weapon with mechanical precision, mowing down everything that moved. Danny Cho picked off targets with single shots, never missing, never wasting ammunition. The swarm reached the base of the wall. They started to climb, their claws digging into the stone and metal. Soldiers switched to close combat, hacking and stabbing at the creatures that came over the top. Vareth lost track of time. The battle became a blur of violence and blood. He saw Therian warriors fall around him. He saw aliens from species he did not even know die screaming. The wall was covered in bodies, both enemy and allied dot, and through it all, the humans kept fighting. Megan Torres was everywhere at once. She dragged wounded soldiers to safety, patched their wounds with quick hands, and then picked up her weapon and returned to the fight. Vareth saw her take a claw strike across her back that cut through her armor and drew blood. She did not even slow down. Lieutenant Greg Holt stood at a communications station, coordinating artillery strikes with cold efficiency. A Vraxan drone came over the wall right next to him. He shot it with his sidearm without stopping his conversation with the artillery teams. Then he went right back to work as if nothing had happened. But the Vraxan numbers were too great. The wall began to buckle under the pressure. Sections collapsed. Soldiers fell back to secondary positions. The organized defense became a desperate scramble. Vareth heard Fleet Commander Doreth's voice over the communications. All units, fall back to the inner perimeter. Repeat, fall back. Therian units began to retreat. They were not cowards, Vareth knew. They were simply overwhelmed. The swarm had broken them through sheer numbers. But the humans did not retreat. Hold position, Commander Vance ordered her squad. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. We hold here. Vareth stared at her. You heard the order. We fall back. You fall back, Vance said. We stay. Someone has to buy time for the evacuation. You will die. She looked at him with those dark, tired eyes. Probably, but not for free. Vareth wanted to argue. He wanted to drag her away from this position by force, if necessary. But something in her face stopped him. This was not suicide. This was a choice. A cold, calculated choice to die so that others might live. He made his own choice then. I will stay, he said. I will fight beside you. Vance nodded once. That was all. The next minutes were the worst of Vareth's life. The Vraxan overran their position from all sides. There was no more strategy, no more tactics. There was only killing and trying not to be killed. Danny Cho ran out of ammunition. He picked up a metal bar from the rubble and kept fighting. A Vraxan Alpha, 3 times the size of the normal drones, came at him with claws raised. Danny charged it head on, screaming something in a human language Vareth did not understand. He jammed the bar through the creature's head and wrote it down as it fell. Then he pulled out his bar and looked for the next target. Kyle Barton took a wound that ripped open his stomach. Vareth could see things inside that should not be visible. But Barton pressed one hand against the wound and kept shooting with the other. His face was pale and covered with sweat, but his eyes were still focused. Still fighting. Barton, get to the medic, Vance shouted. Negative, Commander, Barton replied through gritted teeth. I can still pull a trigger. He collapsed 30 seconds later, still firing. The Vraxan closed in. Vareth stood back to back with Commander Vance, both of them bleeding from multiple wounds. He had never felt so tired in his life. Every muscle screamed for rest. Every breath was agony. Any regrets? Vance asked. There was something like humor in her voice. Yes, Vareth said. I wish I had understood your people sooner. She laughed. It was a short, broken sound. We do not even understand ourselves. A Vraxan Alpha crashed through the defenders in front of them. Its claws were raised for the killing blow. Vareth prepared himself for death. Then the sky lit up. Vareth looked up and saw lights falling from orbit. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They were not weapons. They were drop pods. Human drop pods. Commander Vance looked up at the sky, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled. Reinforcements, she said. The fleet made it. The drop pods slammed into the ground all around them. Their doors blew open, and human soldiers poured out by the thousands. Fresh troops, heavy weapons, vehicles. The Vraxan swarm that had been about to overwhelm them suddenly found itself surrounded. Vance touched her communications device. All human forces, this is Commander Vance. Push them back. No mercy. No prisoners. Show them what humanity can do. The tide of battle began to turn, and Vareth finally understood what true power looked like. The human reinforcements hit the Vraxan swarm like a hammer striking glass. Vareth watched from his position as thousands of human soldiers advanced across the battlefield in perfect formation. They moved like a single organism, each unit supporting the others, each soldier knowing exactly where to be and what to do. Their weapons fire was constant and precise. Their advance was steady and unstoppable. Behind them came the vehicles. Massive armored machines that rolled across the broken ground, their guns blazing. Aircraft screamed overhead, dropping bombs that turned entire sections of the swarm into ash. Artillery strikes fell from orbit itself, guided by spotters on the ground with terrifying accuracy. The Vraxan tried to swarm the newcomers the same way they had swarmed the defenders. It did not work. The humans had come prepared for exactly this tactic. Their formations were designed to handle attacks from all sides. Their weapons never stopped firing. Their soldiers never broke. Vareth had seen combined arms warfare before. Every species had their own version, but he had never seen anything like this. This was not just warfare. This was destruction on an industrial scale. The humans did not simply fight the Vraxan. They processed them. They fed the swarm into a machine made of fire and steel, and nothing came out the other side. A medic reached Vareth and began treating his wounds. He barely noticed. He could not look away from what was happening in front of him. Commander Vance had rejoined her soldiers. She was wounded, exhausted, covered in blood, both human and alien. But she was still giving orders, still directing the battle, still leading from the front. The human reinforcements had brought her new troops to command, and she used them without mercy. Vareth watched her order an entire battalion to advance into a section of the swarm where Vraxan were clustering together. The soldiers obeyed without hesitation. They knew they were walking into heavy casualties. They went anyway, because she asked them to. Because the mission required it. The Vraxan alpha creatures tried to organize resistance. They were the command nodes of the hive mind, the points where the collective intelligence focused. Human snipers targeted them specifically. One by one, the alphas fell, and each time one died, the drones around it became confused and disorganized. The humans had studied the Vraxan. They had found their weaknesses. And now they were using that knowledge to tear him apart. By midnight, the swarm was in full retreat. Vareth could not believe what he was seeing. The Vraxan had never retreated from anyone. They had consumed 3 star systems without ever falling back. They had faced the combined might of a dozen species and never wavered. But they were running from the humans. The human commanders did not let them go. They pursued. They hunted the fleeing swarm across the colony world, destroying every cluster, every nest, every hiding spot. By morning, there were no Vraxan left alive on Sether Prime. Vareth found Commander Vance sitting on a pile of rubble near the ruined wall. The sun was rising, casting golden light across the devastated landscape. Bodies covered the ground as far as he could see, most of them Vraxan, too many of them not. He sat down beside her without asking permission. "You won," he said. "We won," she corrected. "All of us. Every species that fought here today. Vareth shook his head. No. When the rest of us broke, you held. When we retreated, you stayed. This victory belongs to humanity. Vance did not argue. She just stared at the sunrise with those tired, ancient eyes. May I ask you something? Vareth said. She nodded. Your reinforcements. They arrived perfectly. The timing, the placement, everything was exactly right. You planned this. It was not a question. Vance smiled, but there was no joy in it. We always have a backup plan, she said. When we sent our first team to join the coalition, we knew we would be underestimated. We knew we would be given support roles and kept away from the real fighting. So we planned for that. We let it happen. Vareth felt a chill run through him. You let your people die. You let the Vraxen almost overrun us. Also, you could reveal your true strength at the perfect moment. Yes, Vance said simply. We needed the coalition to see what we could do. Not just our soldiers. Our planning. Our coordination. Our ability to project power anywhere in the galaxy at a moment's notice. Now they have seen it. She turned to look at him directly. Do you understand now, Vareth? We were never the weak ones. We were never the species that needed protection. We held back because we did not want to frighten our allies. We matched ourselves to your capabilities because we wanted to build trust. Vareth stared at her. Everything he had thought he understood about humanity shifted and reformed in his mind. The soldiers who died on that wall, he said slowly. They knew the reinforcements were coming? They knew it was possible. Not certain. They chose to stay anyway. They chose to die for a strategic advantage. Vance shook her head. They chose to die so that the civilians behind that wall would live. The strategy was secondary. Humans do not sacrifice themselves for politics or power. We sacrifice ourselves for each other, for the people we protect. Vareth sat in silence for a long time. The sun continued to rise, warm and bright, as if the night of horror had never happened. Finally, he spoke. I have fought beside many species. I have respected many warriors, but I have never felt what I feel now. What do you feel? Vance asked. Dread, Vareth admitted. Deep, cold dread. Not because you are monsters. The Vraxen are monsters. You are something else. Something worse. He met her eyes. You are kind. You are compassionate. You build friendships and alliances. You help those weaker than yourselves. But underneath all of that, you are weapons. Every single one of you. Weapons that can be pointed at anything that threatens what you love. Vance nodded slowly. That is the most accurate description of humanity I have ever heard. Vareth stood up and looked out at the battlefield one last time. The human soldiers were already beginning cleanup operations, moving with the same efficiency they had shown in battle. Medics treated wounded. Engineers began repairs. Life continued. I will tell my people what I have learned here, Vareth said. I will make sure they understand. Understand what? Vance asked. That the galaxy should be grateful you are kind. Because if you ever stop being kind, nothing could stand against you. He walked away, leaving Commander Vance sitting alone in the sunrise. Months later, Vareth would write his account of the Battle of Sether Prime. It would be studied in military academies across the Therian Dominion. It would change how his people viewed humanity forever. The final words of his account became famous. I have fought beside many species. I have faced many enemies. But I never knew true dread until I stood alongside mankind and saw what they were willing to do. They are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest or the most advanced. But they are the most dangerous. Because they have learned to turn everything, even their own deaths, into weapons. Pray that humanity remains your friend. Because if they become your enemy, nothing in this galaxy will save you. The dread he felt on Sether Prime never left him. It stayed with him until the end of his days, and he was grateful for it.